Could George Russell really win the 2025 World Drivers' Championship? It's a long shot, but people are beginning to believe that he might have an outside chance, or at the very worst, prove all of his haters wrong. So far in 2025, Russell has enjoyed his best start to a Formula 1 season, scoring 2 podiums in Australia and China, and 4th place in the sprint in China as well. Coupled with the fact that Toto Wolff has come out and said 2 things of importance in 2 separate interviews. Firstly, he has said that he believes the Mercedes to be the second fastest car on the grid behind the McLaren. And on the other hand, he has said that Russell is a top 3 driver. Let's unpick both of those statements, shall we? So first things first, do I think that the Mercedes is the second fastest car? I think probably not, because we haven't seen the full potential of the Ferrari yet, which I still believe to be the second fastest car. We saw how good that car could be in the sprint race with Lewis Hamilton taking victory. But they have been the second fastest car on balance across the whole season, simply because they have delivered the results, whereas Ferrari have just been Ferrari about it. And Red Bull, in Max's hands, are there, but you just don't know where Red Bull are right now, because that car is so tricky to drive. And you've had Bernie Collins come out and say that without Max, it would be the 10th fastest, which I don't agree with that whatsoever. But Toto Wolff's claim that its Mercedes are the second fastest isn't without its merits. What about the top 3 driver claim? Well, I don't agree with this. I believe that the top 3 drivers right now are Verstappen, Hamilton and Leclerc. But George is the one knocking on the door. He is definitely in the tier below those 3, alongside Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso. Yes, even though Alonso's had a stinky start. So, what are Russell's strengths? Well, he's an outstanding qualifier. He had the moniker of Mr. Saturday when he was at Williams, and he carried that form over into his time at Mercedes. And in my view, last year, he was outstanding in qualifying. Got 4 pole positions last year. I don't have that accurate information to hand. I should do. But he definitely took some brilliant pole positions. The ones that really stick out in my mind are Vegas, Canada and Silverstone. And obviously there was a pole in Qatar, but let's not talk to Max Verstappen fans about that one, shall we? But he's definitely got the speed over 1 lap, and I definitely felt like he was outperforming that Mercedes based on what we then saw in the race the following day. Because there was that meme, wasn't there, that you could put George at one end of the grid and you could put Lewis at the other end of the grid, and they would meet in the middle and be next to each other in the race. And I think that's partly because Lewis was under-delivering in qualifying and George was over-delivering. But you can definitely see that George has got the speed, so much so that I think that George is pushing Charles Leclerc for the title of fastest guy over 1 lap. There's a few guys nipping at the heels of Charles Leclerc. George is one of them, Max and Lando. And Lewis is definitely starting to discover his qualifying mojo again, but I don't think I'd put him in that conversation just yet. But certainly, over 1 lap, George has got the skills. But the criticism of him, particularly from Lewis Hamilton fans, was that George had no tyre management and that Lewis was just still better than him in race trim. And yes, Lewis is better than George in race trim. This is why I have Lewis in the top 3 and George not in the top 3. But is he really that bad with his tyres? Well, he still won 2 races last year and produced a brilliant tyre saving drive in Belgium. Okay, that ended up causing him a disqualification, but you could see the skills on show there regardless of the error that was made by Mercedes. So how much of it is that Russell is a tyre eater and how much of it that Lewis is just that much better? Well, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Yes, Lewis is better on race pace than George. We saw that in Vegas last year, but George had the benefit of starting from pole position. But George also was in control of that race. His tyres did not die off. He had a great run throughout that entire Grand Prix. And I think George is better on his tyres than people give him credit for, but they like to knock him because he's daring to challenge the GOAT. So does this mean that George could win the championship this year? Ultimately, I don't think he will. I think it's going to still be a long shot, but his performances in the first 2 races have certainly raised the possibility of it happening, but we're talking small amounts being raised. A lot of things are going to have to go his way. The McLaren is definitely the fastest car, and he is going to have to beat one or both of the McLarens quite a lot this year. And he's got to hope that he's beating one, different one. Say Lando wins one race, he's second, Oscar, then you flip the 2 McLarens to have George in the middle. And that's not a guarantee. I mean, yes, okay, Oscar and Lando have split the wins in the Grand Prix so far, but that's going to be a tall ask. George was significantly behind Lando until Lando's brake problems happened towards the end of the Chinese Grand Prix, and if he'd had an extra lap, he would have finished ahead of him, but that didn't happen. You've also got to think that the Ferraris are going to sort their stuff out. Lewis showed that car has got pace. Charles also showed that car has got pace in the sprint and the Grand Prix respectively. They just need to get their setup right, and they're good to go. And I do think the Ferrari is quicker than the Mercedes. And then, of course, there's the Max Verstappen factor as well. Max is very, very fast, even in a car that he's not comfortable with. He's still second in the championship, a couple of points ahead of Russell at this stage. And you got to think that Red Bull, a team as good as that, regardless of the problems that they have, are going to get better. They are going to get better, and they're going to find a bigger performance window for that car. But at worst, George Russell could definitely prove a lot of his doubters wrong, particularly, as I said, in the Lewis Hamilton fan community. They felt that George was being prioritised over Lewis last year. You had, he didn't beat Lewis on merit last year. And I hate to break it to you, he did beat Lewis on merit last year. In my view, that W15 was a very difficult car to drive. And George was more comfortable with it than Lewis was. But when Lewis was comfortable with the car, he was quicker than George. We saw that in Silverstone, we saw it in Vegas, and I think if Lewis had been slightly higher up in Vegas, he would have got that win. And I felt that George was better with his execution in qualifying than Lewis was. I feel like Lewis was trying to outdrive the problems of the car that he felt that he had and made more mistakes in qualifying, whereas George was able to adapt to what he had a bit better than Lewis was, which is why George was able to achieve the results that he did in qualifying last year, not necessarily in the races. So, yes, George can start to show that actually those results that were allegedly manufactured last season by Mercedes weren't in fact manufactured, and he earned them on merit, as most people will be able to ascertain. But he's also got other people to show. I still think he is trying to show the powers that be at Mercedes that he is the guy for the long term. Why do I say this? Well, there is the Max Verstappen issue. Now, I'm not going to get into this again in full detail from the Max side, because I've already done a video on that somewhere around here. Please go and watch that, where I talk about why Max could move to Mercedes and why it could be George that is the one to move aside. But from George's perspective, listen, George doesn't have a contract beyond 2025, and he wants to have a new contract with Mercedes, and he wants to show them that going into these new regulations, where there is heavy speculation that Mercedes are expected to be the best in class, that he is going to be the guy to lead them forward, at least in the first few years, whilst Kimi Antonelli continues to find his feet. And, you know, he also wants to show them that, no, you don't need Max Verstappen, you want me. Now, contract talks have been put on hold. Yes, Toto Wolff has said he plans to sign George long term, but until that signature is on the contract, then, well, we won't know. But this is also a chance for George to show that, okay, people thought I was lucky last year, people thought that the other guy was being sabotaged. I'm going to show you that that wasn't the case, and I beat him on merit last year, that I deserve to beat him, and you can stop with the excuses. And so far, he's done that perfectly. He has been outstanding. You can't argue with the results. Finishing behind a very fast Verstappen in Australia and a race-winning Norris, and then finishing behind the two McLarens, where he was actually competitive against the McLarens at points. made Lando's life a little bit harder, and particularly at the end of the first pit stop, or the only pit stop that they both took, he showed that he was quick and could compete. Now, whether this plays out over the course of a season remains to be seen, but Mercedes definitely are in the best position they have ever been in these ground effect regulations. As I've already detailed, I think it's going to be hard for George to win the title, but he's got a very small chance. I wouldn't rule him out just yet, but I just think there's going to be a few things working against him. But if he continues on this path and continues to deliver these results and maybe even get some wins, then you start to paint a different picture and think, actually, maybe George could be the guy to do it. And one thing I do think George will do this year is I think he will establish himself as the fastest guy over one lap. He will assume that mantle from Charles Leclerc. But we've got to wait and see. Big weekend coming up in Suzuka. Guys, comment below. Let me know. Do you think George Russell could win the World Championship this year? Or do you think it's more prove the haters wrong and show the world that you can be a world champion, but not this year? And if you want to see more of my content, then please do hit the subscribe button. Please do hit the like button as well. The views on the last video were absolutely insane. Thank you so much to everyone that took the time to watch, to listen to what I had to say, and also commented as well. I will try and respond to comments as best I can, but I can't always respond to every single one. Until next time, guys, stay safe, and I shall speak to you all very, very soon.